Again, good evening. I am delighted to be here in Staten Island for the first public hearing of the 2018 Charter Revision Commission. Before we get into the substance of what we're doing, I'd like to call on our host commissioner, McKee to say a word or two. McKee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Honorable Committee. Thank you, audience, public who are here this evening. Staten Island is a wonderful place. It's a passionate community with hardworking people who care about community, family, society, and major issues. And tonight, we see a nice turnout of the public who take civics very seriously. I serve as the president of COJO, which is the umbrella organization for the Jewish community. And besides working within our community, we do interfaith outreach work. We bridge all the communities together. And on behalf of Staten Island and COJO and the JCC, which I serve as a board member, we thank you, Mr. Chairman. We thank your honorable committee for coming out to my island tonight. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you for not just hosting us tonight, but for agreeing to serve on the commission. I know that the mayor was very pleased. I'm going to ask the commissioners to introduce themselves. Why don't I start with Marco on that end, if I can. And tell the audience what you do for a living or something.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Carrion, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit.
Good evening. I'm Sharon Greenberger. I'm the President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater New York.
Hello and good evening. My name is Annetta Sicharan, and I'm the Executive Director of Chaya Community Development Corporation.
It's Mendy Marachnik again. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Carlos Chasura, President and CEO of the New York Building Congress.
Good evening, I'm Kyle Bragg. I'm Secretary Treasurer of the 165,000 member SEIU 32BJ Property Service Union.
I failed to introduce myself. I'm Cesar Perales. I'm honored to serve as chair of the commission. I recently stepped down as Secretary of State of New York, but I've had a number of positions in both government and in civil rights as an advocate.
Good evening. My name's John Siegel. I'm a practicing lawyer in Manhattan, a partner in the law firm of Baker and Hostetler.
Good evening. I'm Una Clark. I am a current trustee for the City University of New York, a former member of the New York City Council, and pleased to be able to serve on this commission. But formerly, I was the educational consultant for Staten Island, so all of your Head Start and daycare, I was your chief trainer.
Good evening. My name is Dale Ho. I currently serve as the director of the ACLU Voting Rights Project.
Hello, I am Wendy Weiser, and I am director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law.
I'm Larry Angelo. I'm a former budget person for the mayor and for the city council, and I'm currently a research fellow at the Institute for State and Local Governance and a proud graduate of Curtis High School.
Will Commissioner Fernandez introduce herself?
Good evening. Apologies for my tardiness. My name is Angela Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director and Supervising Attorney of the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and I also serve as a designee, mayor's designee on the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
It is clear to me that we have a quorum. We're almost all here, which rarely happens, so that I think it's a reflection of our interest in hearing from the folks in Staten Island. just so that you'll understand what our role is, the mayor of the city of New York, whoever is serving as mayor, has the opportunity to appoint a commission, which they do every several years, to review the city charter. That's the city's constitution, in essence. And our role is to listen to the people who come to our hearings and who write us questions, and to talk to experts, and to come up with recommendations for amending the city charter. Those recommendations are then presented to the citizens in November when they vote, so that we recommend, and ultimately you, the citizens of our city, decide whether or not you will adopt our recommendations to revise or amend the charter. Having said that, we review the entire charter, everything that is in the charter. But every mayor has a particular interest. Mayor de Blasio is interested in how our democracy works, how our elections work. And he is looking to us to engage you on questions of how our elections ought to be held, how much money should be involved, how can we get more people to vote. Those issues are of particular interest, and we're hoping to learn as much as we can about how to make our city more democratic. For the record, we have conducted extensive outreach in advance of this meeting. We have filed all of the legal notices. We've posted public notices in the city record, posted hearing notices on our own website, and we've sent notices to media outlets, not just in Staten Island, but throughout the city. We are now on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at NYCC Charter, NYC Charter. And rest assured, we're going to continue to ensure that we get as much outreach as possible. As an example, we've already posted a video of our first organizational meeting. It is now available on our website. We also have sign language interpreters, and for those who need it, we have Spanish language interpreters. I want to thank the staff. I'll just run through their names. I can assure you they are very important to our functioning. Candace Cho, Josh Stidis, Sabrina Fong, Christine Billy, Aaron Bloom, Kwame Akasha, Essence Franklin, Michael Shackey, and Bruce Thomas. And we are going to have 4 other meetings after this. We're going to be in the Bronx, at Bronx Community College, in Queens, the Queens Library in Flushing, Brooklyn at the Botanical Garden in Brooklyn, and in Manhattan at the New York Public Library. We're also hoping to hold neighborhood meetings after the first round of what we call our borough hearings. I don't want to go through the rest of the schedule. It is available on our website. True? And so I'm looking forward to hearing testimony. What we're going to do is we're going to call 3 at a time. You'll come and take the chairs there, and we will hear from each of you. Alex Camarde from the reInvent Albany. Linda Barron from the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. And Mary Byrne from the Housing Dignity Coalition. If you'll come forward and you have the floor.
Good evening. Sorry, I just want to make sure this is on. Good evening, Chair Perales and members of the Charter Revision Commission. My name is Alex Camarda. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for reInvent Albany. reInvent Albany advocates for transparency and accountability in state government, and we are the leading champions for transparency in New York City government, particularly the Freedom of Information Law and open data. We will present detailed recommendations at future hearings of the Commission, but wanted to comment tonight on two overarching issues as the Commission begins its work. The first is the scope of the work of the Commission that it takes on, and the second, when changes to campaign finance law should become effective. So first I'm going to talk about the Commission's scope of work. As was mentioned, the Municipal Home Rule Law requires the Commission review the entirety of the city charter, though Mayor de Blasio has requested the Commission particularly focus on campaign finance reform and increasing public funding of campaigns. The good news is the city's campaign finance system, 30 years in the making, is a model for governments across the country. We support changes to improve the city's already strong campaign finance system. But New York City has a ways to go before it curbs the perception of and undue influence of money on government decision-making. As the city's campaign finance system has gotten stronger over the years, money has flowed outside of the system. Today, we believe the fastest growing area of outside influence, and in some instances corruption risk, is from people doing business or seeking favors from government, contributing to nonprofit organizations affiliated with government. We asked the Commission to take a close look at the large, unregulated contributions, in some instances over $1 million and often tens of thousands, given by companies, individuals, and others doing business with the city to city-affiliated nonprofits, city agencies, and other city offices. We believe there are well over 100 city-affiliated nonprofits. However, there is no public listing. We asked the Commission to consider significantly restricting donations to city-affiliated nonprofits and city agencies by companies and individuals doing business with the city and greatly increase the transparency of these donations. Currently, there's not nearly enough transparency for contributions to nonprofits tied to city government. Contributions of $5,000 or more are disclosed every 6 months, and the amount reported are provided in 7 broad ranges rather than the actual amount of the donation. In some instances, contributions are not disclosed by agencies to the public at all. There's a separate process for making contributions anonymous. Additionally, the Conflicts of Interest Board, which regulates this, releases the information in a very large 500-plus page PDF instead of a tabular form that can be reviewed in a spreadsheet, thereby making it very difficult for outside groups and journalists to analyze the donations. We also urge the Commission to review conflicts of interest potentially created when city officials help fundraise for city-affiliated and unaffiliated nonprofits and also city agencies. The current restrictions on fundraising for city agencies, city-affiliated nonprofits, and unaffiliated nonprofits are nuanced and complicated, but ultimately too permissive and very challenging to enforce. reInvent Albany is particularly concerned about the role of volunteer fundraisers for city-affiliated nonprofits who are not subject to Conflicts of Interest Board laws or advisory opinions. Second issue I wanted to go over was the effective dates of any campaign finance reform. We expect the Commission will propose changes to the campaign finance system, given the priority by the Mayor. We ask the Commission to keep in mind the unprecedented administrative challenge faced by the Campaign Finance Board in 2021, the next regular city election. 41 council seats and all citywide and borough-wide offices will be vacant. We anticipate as many as 300 to 400 candidates are expected to run for office, which will require the Campaign Finance Board to provide extensive candidate services and handle an enormous volume of post-election audits of every campaign. Because of this extraordinary workload, reInvent Albany recommends that major proposed changes to the city's campaign finance system made by the Commission be phased in over time. This could be done by limiting the implementation of changes to citywide offices in 2021 or all offices in 2023. The redistricting term of 2 years from 2022 to 2023 limits the delay in implementing changes while reducing the burden on the Campaign Finance Board to smoothly administer the 2021 elections. We believe it is better to implement changes smoothly when the Campaign Finance Board has adequate time and organizational capacity rather than overwhelm the agency during an unprecedented election in 2021. There is no pressing need to hurry changes in 2021 instead of just 2 years later. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening and for your service, and we welcome any questions you may have.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the commissioners if they have any questions. But I just want you to clarify something for me. You are suggesting that we not change anything related to the campaign financing before this coming election? I'm not sure I understood your point about making gradual changes.
We support improvements to the city's campaign finance law. What we're suggesting is that the effective date of those solutions not be entirely for the next regular city election, which is in 2021, because of the number of vacant seats and hundreds of candidates potentially running for office.
In other words, you're saying we should look at it, but not put them in place for the next election in 2021? Phase them in and somehow?
Yes, we think maybe just making changes for city-wide offices is one way of limiting the burden on the Campaign Finance Board. And we think that because of the redistricting term that's 2 years, that takes place every 10 years, that's actually convenient in that delaying the changes 2 more years in the long run doesn't matter so much. It won't be delayed 4 years as it otherwise would be.
Yes.
I have a question.
Introduce yourself. Who are, I guess they can see your name.
No, that's fine.
Oh, you can.
Oh, so it's Angela Fernandez. And how does reInvent Albany define a city-affiliated nonprofit?
So it's not so much how we defined it. I think it's more important as to how the city defines it, and that's something that we were seeking clarity on. We've looked at this issue at some level of depth, but I think obviously a greater examination is needed by the commission. But I think that's a key issue. I think for us, the affiliation means control. So we would look for factors like elected officials or city officials choosing board members, serving as board members, providing a disproportionate amount of funding, whether the nonprofits were carrying out a governmental purpose, whether the nonprofits are subject to some of the laws that an agency would otherwise be subject to. For example, the Freedom of Information Law, open meetings laws, procurement practices. These are all factors we think should be looked at if they're not already. I imagine there's an official city definition of affiliated, but I think that's a very important point. And obviously, the stronger the affiliation, the more concern about contributions. We are not concerned about donations to unaffiliated nonprofits by people who don't have ties to the city. And similarly, we're not concerned about donations by companies or individuals to the city who do not have business with the city.
Yeah, I was about to ask a follow-up on
Sure.
your question. Can you give me an example of an affiliated nonprofit? Comes to mind?
Sure. I mean, we believe there's over 100. There's a listing that I
Sorry,
provided.
can you repeat that? I didn't hear that.
We believe there's over 100 city-affiliated nonprofit
Can you give me the name of one I might be familiar with?
Sure. The Mayor's Fund is an example. The Mayor's Fund.
The Mayor's Fund.
Another example is I'm forgetting the name, but there's an association tied to the NYPD. That's a major city-affiliated nonprofit. There's several that are tied to the Parks Department.
This is Wendy Weiser with one follow-up question on the city-affiliated nonprofits. Do you have recommendations relating to office holder affiliated nonprofits separate from city affiliated ones, or do you define that as part of city affiliated?
So there was council legislation passed in recent years that we think mostly addresses elected officials' ties to nonprofits. We're really looking at the nonprofits that are tied to city agencies.
Okay.
John Siegel. I have a question about your suggestions regarding the Campaign Finance Board, which I've practiced in front of a lot over several decades. I was not surprised to hear somebody argue that any changes in campaign finance law should take place following the next election. I've already been contacted by several elected officials who will be candidates in 2021, making the same suggestion, but for the different reason that they are now conducting themselves based on the expectations of current law. And there's some real issues about retroactivity if we're going to change them in this cycle. But I was surprised to hear you say that this is administratively necessary for the Campaign Finance Board. Its audit function takes place largely after the next election. I'm not clear on what you think they can't implement. If we were to change, for example, the contribution limits or any other line item, why is that hard for their auditors to do? They're just applying whatever rule is in effect as of the audit date. So I don't understand the workload argument.
I think you're right, for example, with contributions, where that would probably pose less of a burden than other changes. There are other proposals that are put forth as bills before the City Council that I think the changes would be a tougher task for the Campaign Finance Board to take on. I do want to make clear, we're simply saying that the Commission should consider the administrative workload. We're not saying that the Commission should not put forth reforms and that some of those reforms should not take place in the next election. We're saying it's something to keep into account as you decide which reforms to put before the voters.
Right. One of the issues I've always had with the Campaign Finance Board is that their resources are relatively constant during the 4-year cycle and need to ramp up around election years and just after election years. And certainly we should keep that in mind in terms of the impact that anything we do. We should be supportive of their ability to get the job done, which may raise other issues. So I appreciate the suggestion in that regard.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, Commissioner. I'd like to thank Chairman Perales and the team that's up here today for listening to us tonight. I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. My name is Linda Barron. I'm the president of the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. We represent about 700 businesses here with about 20,000 employees. I would like to ask that you take a comprehensive look at the charter. One of the main issues that we see here on Staten Island is the lack of local control, and that's the lack of local control. And that's across all 5 boroughs. And we've had numerous situations out here where, we have very limited representatives. We have 3 city council members. We have a borough president. I know that when the Board of Estimate was in place, the borough president had a lot more power. We can't get things done, and I'm sure that the situation is similar in other boroughs. Get a stop sign put in or a street widened without waiting an enormous amount of time. After Superstorm Sandy hit Staten Island, there were numerous recommendations from Borough Hall in terms of how to handle that situation with the actual relocation of some of the housing. 5 years later, some of those people aren't even back in their houses right now. Transportation, infrastructure, planning. I would like to recommend that the Commission look at giving some local control back to the boroughs and also looking at a master plan for each of the boroughs. Creating some type of a situation where we can have a master plan so that we literally can look into and make recommendations for our own boroughs, because one size does not fit all. Staten Island has been left out of the 5-borough ferry, well, it's not called the 5-borough ferry plan. But the fast ferries, we have limited transit options, and we have a lot of development here, but we don't have the infrastructure to support it. So in terms of getting more people engaged, civic engagement, I think a lot of the public hearings that we have out here, the reason that people don't come out and vote and attend some of the public hearings is they're disengaged. They feel like it doesn't make a difference if they show up to say anything, because they feel like the powers that be in Manhattan are making the decisions, and no matter what they say is not heard. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time tonight.
Let me just take the first question so I understand. When you talk about local control, in the past, your borough president had more control over things like stop signs, et cetera?
No, from what I understand, this is before my day, there was a Board of Estimate that was in place, and the Board of Estimate, there were borough presidents sat on that, and they had a very specific say. Now, a lot of the say, especially when it comes to planning, goes through the community board with a recommendation through the city council. There's a process for it, but the borough president's office has become more of a cheerleader for the borough, where legislatively they can't do much to make change.
Right.
Hi, Linda. I've had the pleasure of working with Linda when I was at the chamber. Carlos Chasura. I think one of the things we've heard over the years, and this was brought up in the 2010 Charter Review Commission, was how do you strengthen maybe not necessarily the role of the borough president or the role of the council or the role of the community board, but how do you bring it more together? So one of the byproducts of the '89 big charter review was to create something called borough boards. And the borough boards were created to do exactly that, to have local input with a borough president, with the council, and with other stakeholders. I think it is worth this commission looking at what is the role of the borough board, and is there a way of making that more of a locally strengthened entity. So, and I think this is something that we will hear in other boroughs. I think you will hear it more in Staten Island when we come back, but it is something that I know we commented on in our findings section in 2010.
We have the advantage of having had somebody who served on the Charter Revision Commission last time around in 2010, so I think it's useful. But thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioner. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you. My name is Mary Bourne. I am a deacon at First Central Baptist Church and a member of the Housing Dignity Coalition. The coalition is a group of faith-based leaders, and our goal is to make sure that affordable housing is maintained on Staten Island. You know, we're currently in the process of a lot of planning for rezoning, especially around the Bay Street area. And the coalition has discussed the plan that the Department of City Planning has set up. And in discussing this with a lot of the members of our churches, we get a lot of concern from the congregants that the prospect of being able to afford to live after this rezoning is done, to afford the rent, is becoming more scarce. We've met with several people, and the families have already complained that landlords are already increasing rent. And as you know, there are so many families that are on this North Shore that are already rent burdened. So we're really concerned about the effects of this rezoning and how it will affect our North Shore families that have been here for so many years. I also want to include the fact that the public use of public land, and we're also concerned that the public land, and we have very few pieces of public land left that's owned by the city, that they're not given over to private developers so that they can create an affordable housing. And our target is to not only have affordable housing, but deep affordable housing as this plan goes forward.
Any comments from any of the commissioners? I think we know the issue of housing affordability is a major issue in this city. It's something we expect to hear wherever we go. But I thank you for your testimony. All right. We may have a question.
Thank you. I was wondering if there's an issue with the I'm sorry, I'm Kyle Bragg. I was wondering if there was an issue with the revitalization of current affordable housing. Is that also an equal concern, and is the current affordable housing inadequate for the current population?
Well, according to the plan, the affordability is not deep enough. We're talking families that earn an income between, I would say, $25,000 and $35,000 annually, and the plan targets families that are earning $52,000 annually. So it leaves a pretty large percentage of the families that currently reside on the North Shore.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to call three other people to the desk. Brianna Clark from NYPIRG. Marjorie Garvin. The organization is Black Homes, I think. And Kim Hinkson.
Good evening, and thank you for holding this public hearing. My name is Brennan Clark, and I'm the project coordinator at the College of Staten Island for the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG. I'm delivering testimony on behalf of Megan Ahern, NYPIRG's program director. I will briefly review 5 key ways the city can offer greater services and opportunities for voters through the passage of amendments to the city's charter. More information is provided in the printed testimony. First, establish same-day voter registration for city elections. Each year, just as interest in elections and candidates begins to peak, potential voters find that the deadline for registering to vote has already passed. We all know that voter participation in New York City has fallen to shockingly low levels.
Could you, I'm having, turn the mic perhaps a little bit towards you. We're having a little
I apologize. Is that a little bit better?
Much better.
Okay.
Much better. What did you say about getting very little notice about what?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing is to establish same-day voter registration for city elections. Each year, just as the elections and interest in them is beginning to peak, potential voters find that the deadline for registering to vote has already passed. And we all do know that voter participation in New York City has fallen to shockingly low levels. And we would encourage the city to implement same-day or no registration, as the states that have implemented them are traditionally have the highest voter turnout in the country. Second, to establish automatic registration for city elections. By automatically registering eligible clients who interact with city agency databases, the system enfranchises many who might not register in time before the election. Provisions would have to be made to accommodate a dual registration system, but automatic registration is particularly important for the city due to the shortcomings that exist with the state's motor voter law implementation. While voters who interact with the DMV enjoy a form of automatic registration, this opportunity may be depressed for voters in the city who hold fewer licenses. Third, implement instant runoff voting for citywide primary elections, allowing primary voters to not only vote for the candidate of their choice, but to rank in order of preference the other candidates as well would enfranchise absentee voters. There's simply not enough time for the Board of Elections to turn around runoff absentee ballots by the election. In low turnout elections, such as a municipal runoff, these absentee voters can easily be the margin of victory or defeat. The Commission should propose implementation of IRV for citywide municipal primaries. At an absolute minimum, IRV should be introduced for all absentee ballots set for the municipal primaries for citywide positions. Fourth, establish early voting for municipal elections. NYPIRG believes early voting holds potential for increasing voter participation. One important question is whether there is an advantage to holding or for having voters cast their ballots on Election Day when the latest information about candidates and races is available. Another concern is whether early voting has dampened turnout for low turnout elections. We would urge the Commission to study these issues and present their findings to the public before deciding on how to implement early voting for the city. And fifth, to make the city's voter guide more useful, the 1988 charter revision process established the city's voter guide. We applaud the Campaign Finance Board for embracing and improving the guide since then, but we suggest that the guide include district attorneys and any state legislative races occurring in municipal election years, and urge the Commission to consider requiring the publication of a hard copy guide for state and federal races as well. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we look forward to a continued conversation on these issues and others.
Before I turn it over to the commissioners, who I know will want to comment on your suggestions, there is a major issue. The Board of Elections is a state agency. So some of the things that you are recommending are very attractive to us, but we cannot implement on our own. But we are going to try to find ways to meet the goals that you are suggesting we pursue, even though we're going to have to very carefully study the powers that the City of New York has in the city charter and the powers of the New York State Board of Elections. With that, I'll throw it open. Dale, would you have a question? You just...
For the court reporter, this is Dale Ho with a question. I just have a question, and if you don't know the answer, it's all right. What, if anything, do you know about the legal authority that the city would have to have a different registration deadline from the rest of the state, or an automatic registration policy just for municipal elections, or early voting just for municipal offices?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that, but I can consult with our program director and get back to you with an answer.
No problem. I mean, just as a practical matter, let's take early voting, for example. I mean, I think, candidly, as a policy matter, I'm in favor of all the reforms, early voting, same-day registration, automatic registration, those three in particular that you mentioned. But if we had early voting for municipal elections, if someone came to vote early to cast a ballot in municipal elections, would they have to come back at a you mean only for municipal elections, not for state and federal? Is that your proposal?
Yes, that's correct. That's our proposal.
Okay.
Carlo?
Hi, Carlo Shasura. I just want to clarify, I didn't hear what you said for your fourth point, just the first line.
That we believe that early voting holds potential for increasing voter participation.
Okay. I'm intrigued by the instant runoff idea. Can you explain to me how a voter would actually cast their ballot on an instant runoff? Probably nobody in this room, or some of you may remember school board elections, where you'd go in and you'd rank 1, 2, 3. I happened to run in one of those, and I remember you were able to cast your ballot once, you ranked in order of preference, and then you left, and you never had to go back. So are you looking at a similar idea for that?
Yeah, precisely. When an absentee voter would fill out the ballot the first time, they would rank in order their preference for the candidate, and in the instance of a runoff, their vote would automatically go to their highest ranked candidate that's in the runoff election.
So when we go to vote on the machine, we would actually rank 1 John Smith, 2 Mary Smith, 3, et cetera.
That's correct, sir.
That may be something within our purview. I know that it's been discussed many times, and that it was actually something raised with a prior commission Preferential voting is another way of describing it. Instant runoff. That is something that we are very interested in talking about. Anyone else? Angela.
In your second...
Identify yourself.
Oh, yes. Angela Fernandez. In your second point, you mentioned automatic registration, but I couldn't hear exactly where that would happen or how that would happen. I'm familiar with it at the state level, but at the city level, how could that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It would occur when a potential voter interacts with city agencies. So, for example, currently, people have the opportunity to register to vote in a form of automatic voter registration when they sign up for driver's licenses. Unfortunately, not a lot of people in the city drive, and there are actually 300,000 less female driver's license holders in the states than there are men, with 600,000 more women, so it does discriminate against women in some forms as well. So essentially,
but
when they
in terms
interact,
of the, I guess the follow-up question is, what city agencies would you imagine could be the place where one could go in and say, I'm going to do a particular function at a city agency, and then I also want to register to vote?
I don't have a specific answer for you, but I can, again, consult with our program director and get back to you.
Okay,
But generally,
thank you.
anyone's available.
Okay.
Thank you.
How about a marriage license?
Oh, yes.
You
but
get
then
married
does that
only
mean
if you
don't have to get
register to vote.
married?
Anyone else with a silly comment?
As long as they don't rescind it when you get divorced.
That's true. Someone's concerned about what happens when you get divorced. Would you lose your right to vote? Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate it.
Yes, my name is Marjorie Garvin, and I've been fighting for 40 years in a community that has practically been forgotten about. I know my city council member does everything possibly that she can do to try to get the help for me to get a community center built in Park Hill. We have 5 owners of 15 buildings. The 15 buildings consist of 110 apartments, and 1 building consists of 220 apartments. And we have nothing in that community for the children, the young people. And I've been promised since Dave Dinkin was mayor, I'm coming to you to fight with me with our mayor to help provide a community center in Park Hill. We have 500 new homeowners in celebration behind Park Hill. And Debbie, our city council, Debbie Rose, had it cleaned up behind Park Hill last year, and we found city land back there that a community center could be built. So we need the funds to have that built. I was promised by one of the owners a community center 5 years ago in one of the buildings, and that fell through. He didn't come up with the money.
Commissioner Park, do you have a reaction?
Yes, I see you.
Your name?
I'm Una Clark. I'm a former member of the City Council, and I see you are wearing the T-shirt from your City Council member.
Yes.
And I would encourage you to speak with her about this as a special project for Staten Island, because this is budget time for the city and the City Council. So if this is an item she wants to carry, I'm sure that she'll get support from among the colleagues. Our role as commissioners is not to advocate for money, but to see how we can better help the city to deepen its understanding of the democracy of which we're a part. So I will tell Debbie Rose that you came to testify. She knows me personally, so you can say former council member Clark. Since I came over to Staten Island to get her elected, I just want to make sure that she produces for you, and I will take this to her. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the testimony.
Good evening, everyone. Commissioner and your team, I welcome you. This is my first time ever attending a meeting like this. I humbly come before you. I am a parent of Stapleton community since 1991, raised 7 children in that community. And I originally came from Queens, and I've lived in Texas and Louisiana through my husband in the military. Came out here on a hardship. I raised my children, and I thank God for all the help I have ever received from people out here in Staten Island raising my children. But now I am a chair of the advisory board of the Gerard Carter Center, and I'm also on the neighborhood advisory board. I'm trying to give back to the community. I retired from working for NYCHA because that was the job that was going to pay for a single mother to pay the rent and raise their children in that community. And my concerns are broad range because I know about the schools, the Gerard Carter Center, the neighborhood. We have some in Stapleton, Park Hill, and Clifton. That's the area Gerard Carter Center is supposed to be servicing. And they're doing a good job, but we want them to do an excellent job. And right now they need a director, a night director. They need more services so that they can invite more people that want to offer their services like dancing and other cultural and art programs. We have children in our neighborhood that are affected by lead poisoning. I am a mother with 1 child, and that is the biggest challenge of my life, raising that 1 child. And we need more support services for parents with children with lead poisoning. And those type of services, my suggestion would be arts and crafts, things that they can build with their hands. We have a courthouse that's on Tawdry Street that's not being used right now. That would be an excellent place to have skilled trade. We need to teach our young people things that they have lost contact with, and they just don't have anywhere to go. So they hang out and they do things that are not good. But if we offer more services in those neighborhoods, starting with the Gerard Carter Center, which in my opinion, we need 4 Gerard Carter Centers in that neighborhood to help our youth. And another thing I'm concerned about, I'm a senior now, I actively partake in the senior center in Stapleton. And over the past 10 years, I have seen the hurt that the seniors have gone through when they become displaced and moved out of their private homes in the neighborhood and moved to places that they really are not happy with. And there's a lot of disability problems in our neighborhood with the youth and with the seniors. And I just implore to everybody to provide services for people with disabilities, because they may have a disability in one form as the world sees it, but they may have a gift in another form. And the only way that we can help them is by providing different types of services that will bring this creativity. We have groups in my church, at First Central Baptist Church, they're doing an excellent job with the young men in our community. And like I said, we just need more. We need more community centers. We have a lot of housing. We need more affordable housing. And we need parks, recreation, because that's the big thing in our country now is being healthy. So whatever you can help us with, I would appreciate it. And thank you for coming.
So I want to thank you for your testimony. Do any of the commissioners have any comment? Thank you very much. Thank you all. What? There's 3 of them left. Yes. Man, it's going to look silly. It's going to look silly. The next panel, Gonzalo Mercado, I think is the name. What is it? True to Life. The staff person from True to Life. And the last person, it's 1 person per organization, right? Who's going to speak on behalf of True to Life? What? All right, then one of you wait for the next panel. One takes this panel, and then I've got, I think it's Harry Timberlake. Oh, that's you. So then you are on this panel. All right. Mr. Mercado, we will start with you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you all the commissioners for being here. I really commend you for your first visit to be Staten Island. I think there is an old saying that, you know, we're left all the time as the last people, the last thought, and, you know, by you being here as your first convening really means a lot for us. So thank you for that. My name is Gonzalo Mercado. I am the Executive Director of La Colmena Community Job Center. We're an immigrant rights organization working with the immigrant community on Staten Island. I'm also a Staten Islander myself. I live and work in the North Shore here on the island. And my reason for being here is to talk specifically about how can we open the democratic process to more residents of New York City. And I have a few suggestions for you all. Like, for example, making Election Day a municipal holiday. I think that could be a great opportunity for people, especially working people who work long hours, who may leave work 9, 10 o'clock. They don't have the chance to go and vote, and you know, they can afford, in many cases, to take a day off to go do that. I am originally from Chile, and we vote there on Sundays. I know that might not work for a lot of people, but at least it's the day that most people are stay at home, and it's done with that purpose, that people have the free time to go and participate in the democracy. Another suggestion that I have is also lowering the voting age. We have a lot of young people who are really engaged in the civic process. We ourselves at La Colmena have a youth group called the Butterfly Effect, and it's a group of young people from different backgrounds and also from different immigration statuses. You know, we have a lot of people who are citizens, other youth are DACA eligible people, and other youth are undocumented. So they have become very interested in being part of the political process. We've seen it now in other parts of the country with the tragic events in Florida, how also young people are really you know, getting involved in the process. So I think that would be a great thing for New York, that we can allow 16 years old and above to vote. Another way I think can we enhance that and open our democracy is having same day voter registration. I think we have to find ways to make it easier for all of us in our community to participate, and same day voter registration would be a great opportunity for people that for whatever reason haven't been able to register to vote. They can do it on the same day. And then also my last suggestion is the issue of non-citizen voting. We have a lot of people here in New York City who may not be citizens, but they're surely contributing to our economy, contributing not just to that, but also to our culture and the vibrancy of our city. And I think an open democracy should have the opportunity to everybody to participate. A great example of this is participatory budgeting. The only requirements for participatory budgeting are to be of the age of 14 and live in the district. And Councilwoman Debbie Rose is the only council person in Staten Island who had opened that process for a couple of years now, and it has been a great way that people can engage and make decisions about the monies they're going to be spending on the district. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let me start the questioning, because I've gotten lots of phone calls from folks when they heard that I was going to chair this commission about non-citizen voting. My immediate response, and I'm certainly open to being persuaded, was that I thought that the reason my mother became a citizen was because she wanted to vote, and that that is currently, and has been for years, an incentive to get people to be naturalized. What has been your experience with getting people to naturalize, people who have their permanent residency and are then eligible to become citizens? And do you think that voting is an incentive to become a citizen?
So in terms of your first question, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote have the opportunity to do so. We've also worked with youth, and we were part of the Student Voter Registration Day last year. We registered 1,000 students to vote. I believe that there are a lot of barriers why people don't become citizens right away. One is the length of time that you have to have as a permanent resident. But people live in those communities and work in these communities as permanent residents, and they should be able to be part of the discussion of the decisions that are made of people here. I think if anything, this will encourage, more people to become involved in the political process. And if they're able to vote in municipal elections, but not on state or federal, maybe that's going to be the stepping stone where you know what, I better become a citizen right now to be able to participate at all levels of the democracy. So I think it will actually help encourage more people, but also for people that are not allowed for the length of the time that usually they have to wait to become a citizen, and in some cases it can be 4 or 5 years before they can do that. So I think all these opportunities that we can have to encourage people can be just positive to make sure that we'll open the process for everybody.
Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, I tried that when I was in the city.
Name?
Una Clark, former member of the city council. I tried that when I was in the city council, that anyone with a green card for 3 years or more and who intend to become a citizen should be able to work for the sanitation department, the police department, or any of the uniformed services that they're kept out of not being citizens. I almost got my head handed to me, but after that, people looked at it and figured that it would strengthen not only the boroughs or the community, but that it would be an encouragement, the same way that nurses had to register in Albany in order to work in a hospital to show that they are nurses and that they would become citizens. They had a paper for intent to become a citizen. I tried that, it didn't work. It may well be because of the time in which we're now living that people may think twice about that. But I am in agreement with you and would work with any other group. Myself, as you will probably hear that my accent didn't go anywhere. It didn't come from Chile, but it came from someplace otherwise. And I know that the energy and the incentive to get people to become citizens are almost always there.
And I just want to add that the money is another barrier. It costs almost $1,000 to become a citizen. And for people who cannot come up with that money, that is a barrier that sometimes they're eligible, they just don't have the funds to actually apply for it.
Wendy, was it? And Dale, you're next.
Thank you. Wendy Weiser, one of the last panelists, recommended early voting as a reform. I was wondering what you thought about that and whether that would address some of the other concerns you raised when you were recommending making Election Day a holiday and sort of providing a range of days and evening hours and weekend hours where people could vote.
Yeah, I'll be in agreement with that. Again, I think our thought behind all of these recommendations is to make an open process for people to participate in democracy. So any initiative, any ideas that are going towards that to make sure that we can get more people to participate. If it's early voting, that would be great. If it's same day voter registration and making the election day a holiday, also is going to help. So I would be in agreement with that as well, as another way of getting more people become involved in the process.
This is Dale Ho. I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about your personal experience working in immigrant communities, how much of a desire there is amongst non-citizens to have their voices heard in local elections.
Yeah, so a lot of our members are people who work in the service industry, are people who work as landscapers, as domestic workers, construction workers, and they have been here for, maybe 20, 25 years. They have been, long-term members of our community. They shop in our community. They send their kids to school. So they're very, very important members in terms of, engaging in the issues of their own communities. Now, voting in municipal elections, maybe it's something that right now has not been allowed for them to do so. Could be because of the issues that we mentioned before. But they're contributing members. They're paying their taxes. They're not only the income tax, but when they go to shop in our local stores, they pay a sales tax. So they're really contributing not just with their labor, but also with where they're spending their money. I think there are a lot of background of why we should extend and make sure that people that are already part of this community can have a way of become more involved in the decisions that are made about the districts.
And I was wondering if you might want to say a little bit about if there are particular issues of interest in amongst non-citizens in terms of local issues that you think it would benefit to get the perspective of non-citizens on.
I would say they're not very different than citizens. I mean, our communities care about having better schools. They care about better public transportation. Like here on Staten Island, a lot of our folks maybe can't afford to have a car, so they have to rely on buses and the one line of train that we have here on Staten Island. So we have people, for example, that live in Port Richmond and they have to travel to Tottenville, the next day. To work, and it takes an hour and a half. So there are a lot of reasons why I believe people are invested, but they're not that different than the issues that other people who are voting right now are. It really is about better jobs. It really is about better schools, better transportation, all of those local issues that people care about.
If non-citizens could vote in local elections, do you have any concerns about the possibility that folks could end up being confused about whether or not they were eligible to vote in state and federal elections? And I mean, because I think the last thing anyone would want would be for someone to inadvertently register or vote for elections or in elections for which they're not eligible and then have to face some kinds of sanctions as a result of that, right? I mean, the last thing we would want is for someone to render themselves ineligible for naturalization or removable because they voted in a federal election when they're not eligible. Is that a concern, or do you feel like that's something that's manageable?
I think as long as we have a very thorough public education campaign about what if we were to have this, what does it look like, partnership with community organizations, with churches, and with places where immigrant communities, for example, go to, would be key to make sure that people understand exactly what they're eligible for and not, I haven't heard personally of any examples, but I see your concern.
And just one last question. Is in your opinion, should we open voting to all non-citizens or only a subset of non-citizens, like say green card holders or people here legally, or just any non-citizen?
I will leave that to you all to discuss. I am from
personal opinion.
I am from my personal opinion that anyone who lives in the district, for at least, 6 months, or so, and is working and is having a family there, should have the opportunity to become involved in the decisions that are made, where they're working, when they're paying taxes, regardless of their citizenship, immigration status, or not, or none at all.
Thanks. Those are the only questions I have.
Thank you. Yep, Kyle Bragg. I hear you, and I agree that the undocumented population in our city contributes richly to our city and their communities. One of the concerns, and there's a lot of dialogue about whether or not undocumented residents should have the ability to vote, is whether or not that invites ICE then to set camp up at these polling sites and then further intimidate these undocumented workers. And I'd like to hear your opinion on that. And the second is in regards to the lowering of the age for voters. I'd be interested in knowing the statistics on the participatory budgeting process, because I know they opened that up to 14 and older, and I'd be interested in knowing how much they've engaged in that process to see whether or not there's any means, if there's any worth in pursuing opening up general elections.
So in terms of your first question, it would be very difficult, I think, to assess if they're actually going to show up to places where people are trying to vote. I think there will be a great responsibility from the city to make sure that these places are safe for everyone, to be able to go in without fearing that anybody's going to be outside arresting them, like it's happening right now on Staten Island. Yesterday we had an arrest of a person at the criminal court, which is a block away from here, a person who went in with an assault case, and it was dismissed at the courthouse, and he walked out and got picked up by immigration. So I know that is a very real problem right now that needs to be fixed, and I totally hear your concerns about it. I'd love to work more. I was actually earlier with Governor Cuomo announcing a series of measures that he's going to do to make sure that ICE complies with, basic rules of due process and warrants and things like that. And in terms of your second question, I think it has been incredible the amount of young people that have been able to participate in the participatory budgeting, because it's not just about voting on something, it's about providing the ideas first, ideas about how can you spend, in this case, let's say $1 million in your community. So they were not able just to go out and vote. They were actually able to participate in the idea gathering and what can we do with this money. So it was really, really engaging. I think a lot of young people, especially the people that we work with, have had a great experience to start becoming civically engaged at a very young age, even before leaving high school.
Nada?
Yeah. Annetta Sicharan. So I was interested in this issue of including undocumented individuals in the non-citizen voting recommendation, but I think my colleagues have covered the nuances about that. But I was also wondering if you could speak about your knowledge of the experiences of other municipalities across the country that have non-citizen voting and what impact that has had on policy making or on those localities.
I have examples for, I believe, New Haven is one of them, and I don't have the other ones with me, but I have not heard of any adverse effects of any of these examples. I can furnish you all with statistics about specific municipalities who have done this, but again, it has been just another way where people can be part of the political process. I think not just the resources that come to where you are, but make sure that people themselves are the ones who are driving the conversation, obviously in concert with elected officials who are the ones in charge of, making policy. It's really important that that place is not, a closed door where, those decisions are made, but that we can open it up to more people, not just in terms of immigration status, but also in terms of age. But I'll be happy to provide you with information about other municipalities.
Angela.
Thank you. Angela Fernandez. I'm glad that the Commissioner brought that up. My understanding is that there are 11 cities around the country that have non-citizen voting. I wanted to ask you a question around the intersection of criminal law and immigration law and how that impacts specifically legal permanent residents. And how that could be a barrier for them to become citizens, even when a legal permanent resident has one misdemeanor that makes them inadmissible and makes them unable to become a citizen. And I know that I would like to know if you're familiar with that and if you could share any thoughts on that.
Yes, and I think a lot of these issues has happened where communities that, may be overly policed and for whatever reason, they start getting criminal records. Especially for very, very minor violations, like, being in the park after dark or, other things, right, that are very minimal, that then become that obstacle for people to become citizens because of having those. So I would say it's very important that we also look at that issue of where our communities that are being over-policed for very, very low violations when we go to other ones, and I don't want to name names here on Staten Island, where, people are doing the same things and we don't see that type of enforcement in it. intersection of communities with the criminal justice system, specifically for minor violations, are really, really an obstacle for people that eventually to become citizens.
I want to thank you. We've taken up an awful lot of your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like the next speaker to have the opportunity.
Harry Timberlake from True to Life. I work for True to Life, which is the anti-gun violence initiative. And we work with the public on mediating conflicts and wraparound services with mental health, schooling, employment. One of the issues I want to talk about is a very big issue, and it's like nobody speaks about it. It's housing. Like, from 28 years and younger, 97% of males do not have their own place to stay. And a lot of males are coming home, maybe coming home from prison, and they cannot go back to their housing projects because they're banned, have nowhere to go. And they was incarcerated from Richmond County, which is Staten Island, and they're forced to go into Bellevue, which is in Brooklyn, a homeless shelter that the conditions is terrible. So a 24, 22-year-old unlikely is not gonna stay in that shelter. When a female gets pregnant or a female is battered, they have all sorts of programs, and it's good. They get vouchers to get places to stay. Men, nothing. If you make $50,000 a year without no criminal record, it's hard for you to get an apartment then with the credit checks and the first month, second month, security, and if it's a broker's fee, forget about it. Forget about it. So for the young males, they have nowhere to go. On parole, which parole just sends them wherever they can send them. Staten Island has no shelters. They have Project Hospitality, which they stuff them in a church somewhere and make them get up very early. So with the work we do, trying to assist them with prison reform and reentry, it's very difficult to tell somebody, I can't help you. You can't come in my house. Where do they go? This is very important, so we need something done. We need some housing. And not just for people coming home from prison, in general. It's no responsibility. 22, 23 years old in New York City, 98% do not have their own place. That's it.
You know, we hear the issue of housing all the time, but I want to thank you. You've been very eloquent and I think articulate in communicating to us how desperate the situation has become.
Yes.
Give the other gentleman an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Perry. I'm the program manager of an anti-gun violence organization called True to Life. We are part of the crisis management system, right? The mayor backs this initiative, and so does our amazing councilwoman, Debbie Rose. I just want to speak about advocating for more cure violence programs on Staten Island. If you look at the numbers where these sites are located, these cure violence, anti-gun violence initiative sites, you'll see that the numbers of shootings, the percentages of shootings and homicides are down, at an amazing number. We need more sites on Staten Island. We have 2 current sites right now, one in the Stapleton Park Hill area, which the numbers have been phenomenal. We are looking at almost 400 days without a homicide in a specific area where we're from, and that's definitely due to the men and women who are working those streets, working with our people that we know, that we identify with, in terms of changing their mentalities, changing the mindsets, changing what's called the community norm. So I'm a lifelong Staten Islander. Well, first, let me welcome you guys to our borough, right? Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We want to welcome you to our borough. This is our town. Most of us, me and my staff, are lifelong Staten Islanders. And so we just need to speak about more cure violence and anti-gun violence initiative programs here on Staten Island. We need backup. We need help with things like recidivism programs, right? Because we can't do it alone. Like my brother Papa said, he spoke about, we have wraparound services. One of our wraparound services are Staten Island Mental Health. These are organizations where the youth that we deal with that are dealing with this trauma that they've been dealing with since youth, right? Staten Island Mental Health is an organization that we refer them to. Daytop also for substance abuse. NYCID, New York City Interpersonal Development for conflict mediation and stuff like that. Although we are the master conflict mediators, this is why these numbers, these shootings and these homicides are down in these areas. So we do have help with some of our wraparound services, but I think we would benefit immensely from recidivism programs here on Staten Island. And lastly, again, I'm also a lifelong Staten Islander, so I do want to advocate for, and we already deemed the forgotten borough, right? We want to make sure you guys don't forget about us. I want to advocate for affordable housing, also me being a lifelong Staten Islander, and community rec centers. Thank you.
Any of our commissioners have a comment?
Kyle Bragg, I agree again that we have a long way to go with criminal justice reform in the city, state, and country. And I agree that everything that you said, that we have to deal with the recidivism that's taking place. And so whatever it takes, we're very interested in hearing what you guys are doing and recommendations and how we address the recidivism problem, because if we don't address it, then we do our city an injustice. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you all very much. That is our last panel. I just want to reiterate my own personal commitment to the process in which we are getting all of these comments from people in the community and the interest that they've shown. Let me throw the floor open to my fellow commissioners to react to what we've heard today and to the process that we're engaged in. Everyone is smiling. Is that an affirmation of my comment? Kyle?
Larry and Angelo. I'm as a former budget person, I believe I heard participatory budgeting 2 or 3 times tonight, and I think it's one of the most interesting and remarkable changes in city government happening sort of very quietly, but it not only allows people to allocate capital within their own district, I suspect it changes how they look at government, because they get to, in effect, be the government. And so I'm glad it's happening here in Debbie Rose's district. And again, it's a great reform.
Yes. I think we have the city council to thank for that. Any other thoughts?
I appreciated hearing some very concrete, this is Aneta Sicharan. I appreciated hearing some very concrete recommendations today that we can consider. I have to admit that I'm sitting here feeling very heartbroken about some of the needs that have been expressed around social services, particularly housing, and feeling like, and sort of, racking my brain thinking, what can this commission do about that? So that's just sort of expressing feeling I'm having, hearing these testimonies.
Angela?
So I was Angela Fernandez. I was surprised by the diversity of issues that were presented, and especially around this last one on gun violence, and what role does the commission may or can play in terms of the charter, and what areas of the charter we may never have considered before, especially around this particular issue of gun violence. It would be very interesting to see. And then, of course, I think that a conversation around who can vote in city government is a worthwhile conversation to have.
You know, it sounds almost as if we're getting a charge to staff. One of the things I'm interested in is obviously the limitations that we have if what we're doing is trying to amend the city charter, which is obviously our charge. The city charter doesn't provide money for anybody, it doesn't fund any programs, can't do anything about violence. But there are some things that we can do, and I'm intrigued. I'd like the staff to clarify for us the limits of what we can do when it comes to election law and changing election laws, and where we can push the boundaries vis-a-vis the registration process. I mean, obviously, we can't do early voting because that's clearly state law, but there must be some things that we can do to facilitate registration, to facilitate voting, and I'd ask you to try as hard as you can to come up with ways, things that we can pursue that would push the envelope, as they say, to make things in New York City a little easier to vote and to participate in our democracy. Does the commission agree that that's their charge?
I wanted to say, as a product of a charter revision, when the city decided that 32 members were not enough and that some were elected and others were appointed, and the charter was then reviewed, that increased the numbers of members on the city council. I became the first ever immigrant woman from anywhere to have been elected, and that was because we were able to educate the community of which I was a part, that it was time that we step up to the table and take responsibility for ourselves and the way in which we lived in the city of New York. So I am very conscious of the issues that come before us, that somebody may say it's not workable. Once we educate communities about the benefits, I'm sure that we'll be able to work together to make it a whole that all New Yorkers can be proud of, because I am proud of my 10 years in the New York City Council and the fact that I left the council with a good name and a good reputation, so much so that I can be on this commission to be able to take another deep dive into what do we do to continue to make our city a place where New Yorkers feel that this is their home and that they can participate in the life of the communities of which we are all a part.
It seems to me that's a good note to end on, unless, Shelley, you have a comment that you wanted to make.
She has a comment.
Wendy does, and then I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, don't.
Sorry.
I'm going to give everybody a chance.
So this is Wendy Weiser again. I did very much enjoy all of the testimony and the recommendations and the diverse issues that were presented. A number of people raised recommendations on topics that there's also pending legislation in the City Council and referenced that, and I think it would be helpful to look to compare what's in the charter and what are the legislative proposals on the topics relating to voting and money in politics and some of the other issues that came up today. So I would be very interested in seeing a list of those pending legislation so we could see what other things are being considered elsewhere.
The one caution I would cite is that there are many times in which legislation is considered and then again considered, and years go by. I think we have this unique opportunity to take it immediately to the voters in November. I think it's a good idea to find out what the City Council may be considering, if only because there may be some excellent ideas, but some of them may not be adopted.
Yes, and to be clear, I want to clarify, I think that it was for the purpose of getting additional ideas for the commission from the city council members as well, not to suggest we shouldn't look at it, I think.
Dale, did you say you wanted?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to, oh, sorry, this is Dale Ho. I just wanted to echo Chairman Peralez's request from staff that we get whatever information you can and the time that you can about about the city's legal authority to have different eligibility requirements for voting in municipal elections, and then different election procedures from the state in terms of methods of registration, timing of registration up into, so methods of registration including automatic registration, timing of registration up until election day, and time of voting, including early voting, because it's not something that, despite the fact that I practice in election law, that I actually know in terms of New York City's independent authority separate from the state to set those requirements differently.
John.
And
Here.
John Siegel, I would just add to the list that Dale Ho outlined, also the day on which Election Day is held. I know that there is a definition of Election Day in the state election law, but whether the city has any flexibility to do it on a different day, because the suggestion of Sunday voting, which is done elsewhere, is a very significant idea. If there's any room to change the date of a municipal election, I'd like to know that.
I'd like to respond to that. Angela Fernandez, I think instead of moving it to a weekend day, potentially exploring the day that is already the election day, and at the municipal level, making it a holiday. Is there any room or space where it's a municipal holiday on that Tuesday, whether it be primaries or the general election? Because that does happen in other countries in the world, where if the election is always on a Tuesday, they just shut down that Tuesday.
Carlo?
Just to explore to see if the possibility of that.
I'm just going to speak as a veteran on charter commissions, Carlos Chasura. We are going to get excited at every meeting about things we hear. I would just urge, just from my experience, that we don't talk issues or debate issues right now until we at least get through one round of hearings, because you'll see every borough will have similar things, and then every borough will have unique issues and ideas. So while I agree that the staff should look at the election law things, because I think that's going to come up, what my recommendation would be, get through the 5 hearings and then have a meeting to literally, and the staff will give us 30, 40 issues, and then we can decide which expert panels and things should go with them.
Yeah, let me just respond to that, because, and this is the chair speaking. I mean, I've got my own views similar to that. I mean, we're going to end up with a preliminary report, but I do think that certainly on these voting issues, where we were appointed because all of us, I think, share an interest in democratizing our elections, that we really get a better feel of what it is we can do. I just don't want us to go through all 5 boroughs talking about setting a new election day when we can't do it, or early voting when that's beyond our power. So I'd like to find out as soon as possible what is it that we could entertain, so that we keep that in the front of our minds when we hear testimony in the other boroughs. Did anybody else want to say something?
I just wanted to say, it's Sharon Greenberger, and I just wanted to say I was struck by the fact that many of the comments here tonight were about resources, ultimately, and the allocation of resources. And in some ways, some of those resources are dependent on how we as New Yorkers are going to be counted in the upcoming census. And so there is this question around participation, right? We're encouraging participation, and voting is a form of participating in that democracy, so is being counted. And so there are going to be, I think, some interesting overlaps in some of those issues.
Point well taken. I will now entertain a motion. I heard a motion to adjourn. I heard it seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned.